Oh, this is being incredibly slow. I do apologise if you're just watching me. I'm just trying to get this to actually load. But, come on. Come on. Anthony says, hello, Sam. So evidently you can see me. I think, am I on? I think we're on. I believe we are. I hope we're in the right stream. I could be wrong, my brain is slightly melted, but yes, hello people of the internet and welcome to Crimson Guitars. Luthiers tips, tricks and training from me, Sam Falloon. Yes, as you can tell, it's rather warm today, so I apologise if my brain is being a bit slow. But yeah, I'm on my own. Matt is in the school today, so I'm doing this solo. If you have any questions, as always, please put them in the chat. I did see some questions in the chat, but they seem to have disappeared now. I don't know why. But yeah, if you do have any questions, please pop them in the chat. I do have one pre-prepared question, which we will go through. And I'm reading it. I have read it before, but I'm just jogging my memory. Hi, as an avid follower of your YouTube videos, I spent last summer rebuilding a really awful Strat copy. This turned out a huge success, stripping right back using your amber stain and finishing all, replacing all of the parts. This question is from Gren, by the way. I'm now starting to build a telly kit with a mahogany body. I would like to try a sunburst finish. I've just ordered a crimson, red and yellow stain from you. Can you tell me which colours would go best? And would I need any others apart from crimson, amber, yellow? My main question is, though, is what colour would be best for the base colour and what order would you suggest to build up a sunburst finish? Well, staining mahogany is tricky. It's one thing if you are working with say maple or alder, which is typically what you use as kind of a base material under a sunburst, because it's a very light wood and it's got a very nice tight grain pattern. Mahogany is a bit more difficult, and it also depends, is it true mahogany, in which case if it's like African mahogany it might be quite naturally orange and light in colour. If it's in fact something like sapele, then it may well be really dark, in which case it's quite tricky to apply. Well, you can't really apply anything lighter than the existing colour, stain wise, because it's already a very dark wood, so you can't, unless you bleach it, which is a whole other process, you can't really apply a lighter colour, say a yellow, to mahogany. Or you can, but it won't really do much. So if you're going for a sunburst on a mahogany, base wood, then I guess it's doable, but it will just be a very dark burst. So you probably want to go, well, if you're outside band, you probably obviously want to still go with black or very dark brown, and you could then potentially move into a really dark red, and then your kind of natural mahogany colour in the middle will be your, as if it was a yellow on a sunburst. And that's probably would be the best way to do it if you're doing it onto mahogany. Again, it will vary. I can actually imagine if you had quite nice light mahogany, or some African mahogany you can get is quite orange. That could actually work quite nicely as your, the centre of the burst being just the natural mahogany. You always, when you are doing a burst, and this is the same with whatever wood you use, and you want to start with the kind of lightest colour. So say if you're doing it on, if you were to be doing it on a maple top or on an older Strat body, words, then you want to start with yellow or amber over pretty much the whole thing, and then you build up the darker bands around that. So you'll start with the yellow. You then potentially move on to an amber. It depends what kind of burst you're going for. If you're going for like a fender type burst, you've got the yellow, the red, and then technically really dark background, but pretty much black. So you do your band of red. Probably crimson red would work well for that, or even the cherry red. And remember, you can always dilute the stains down. They're water-based, so you can always dilute them down. So you'd start with yellow, do a band of red, and then finally your black on the outside, with it obviously being the darkest colour. And then, now people quite often ask when they do staining for the first time, especially with bursts, they're like, oh well, I've put the stain on and it looks really patchy. Because the wood will obviously soak up a lot of that stain immediately because it's a bunch of straws. It will just suck it all in. But what you can do, and I think we've touched on this before, to blend them together is use some wet tissue or wet cloth, and you can kind of blend the stains together because they are water-based and water-soluble. So that's the best way to do it. Another note is always, and this is especially true in mahogany, is always raise the grain on the wood before you do any staining. By which I mean, after you've sanded everything up to 320 grit, for example, you want to wipe over the entire body with a bit of just wet tissue or wet cloth. Only lightly, you don't need to soak the thing. And you'll find that all the wood fibres that have been compressed from the sanding will suddenly go all fluffy and pop up, which would happen if you were to put stain onto the body without raising the grain, which you don't want, because then you're left with something that looks alright, but you've got loads of fluffy strands of wood fibres poking up. So you want to do that, let it dry, and then very lightly, and I mean this is another mistake I see quite often, is after people have raised a grain, they'll then take an orbital sander to it and sand through kind of the layer of wood that they've just raised the grain on, which kind of defeats the point. So you just want to gently rub over the top of it with some 320 grit just to remove the fluffy bits. And then if you can, I always will take it, we've got an air compressor out the back, and especially on say mahogany or anything with an open grain, I'll dust it off before I do any staining, because you want it to be as clean a surface as possible before you apply any stain. I think, did it also mention, no, I think that was it. So yeah, sunburst on mahogany is tricky, though probably doable. It will just look a bit different and unique. But I'd suggest probably colour-wise, you'd be looking, well, again, black for the outside, then potentially like a dark deep red, maybe even an oxblood for the red band. And then, as I said, the middle you'll probably just want to leave natural, because I don't think a yellow stain is going to help things along. So you'd go natural, red, and then black on the outside. Okay, have we got any other questions? Yes. John Z D says, hello chaps, I'm thinking about doing some kind of pattern on a guitar I'm building. I have nitrilacc paint for the main colour. Think you're saying, say I want to do a black polka dot on white. Are you by any chance trying to replicate a guitar played by Angine de Poitrine? Because I know that is going around at the moment. Yeah, that is certainly doable. It'd probably be quite simple to do. I mean, there's two ways of doing it. One would be, firstly, spraying the whole guitar body or whatever you're working on with obviously a white base coat, getting that dead flat. If you go on an academy, and we have a full nitro finishing course on there, so that will take you through all the steps of kind of finish preparation and spraying and flat sanding and buffing on there. But yeah, you want to obviously get a white base coat on there, get that nice and flat. And you could either, the way I'd probably do it if I was to do it would be to either buy or make some like vinyl stencils, you know, with the cutout circles in them. I'm sure you can probably buy something like that quite easily. And you know, either get it as like a full sheet with a bunch of circles on that you could then stick and wrap around the body, or you could stick them on individually and then mask up the rest of the body. Either way, you know, you'll want a negative of the circle that you then stick on and essentially mask off the guitar, leaving a bunch of circles exposed. And you'd then just spray over it with black nitro. Remove the mask and then go over the whole thing with nitro top coat. That's one way to do it. I guess another way would be if you bought, say, vinyl stickers, circular stickers. You could then position them, stick them on the guitar, and seal everything in with top coat. There's a bit more risk with that one because obviously they're just adhered onto the surface. But I imagine either way would work, but I'd probably use stencils and spray over the whole thing with black, and then you lift the stencils off and voila, you're left with a bunch of circles on a guitar, which is a cool look. Anthony says, I bought some lovely crotch American black walnut for a drop top from Crimson. How do you suggest preparing for gluing to the body blank? Are you talking about actually jointing the top, or thicknessing it down for gluing? I mean, jointing with a drop top we'd always do with a jointing plane, like a number 7 plane, which I haven't got up there anymore because they're taking it back into school. But a jointing plane and what's called a shooting board. I don't think I've actually got one here, but it's essentially a big block of wood that you put on your bench. You hold your top in place and you actually plane sideways on. So instead of planing, you know, how you normally would, you've got the plane sat on a flat bed, and you can run it along the side of the top, and you can get a very, very, very tight joint that way. And then, yeah, clamping a drop top is always a bit tricky. You need to use very light amounts of pressure if you're using, say, sash clamps on the side, because it's quite easy to cup and bow the actual top up, and it can kind of collapse in on itself. You can even, it really doesn't need much pressure, you only need a very small amount of glue if you've got a good joint, and you can even just use strips of masking tape stretched across the joint, and the tension of that will pull it together enough to get a pretty good joint. After that, if you're talking about thicknessing, what we would usually do, I guess again it depends what kind of equipment you've got. What we'd usually do is put it through a thickness sander, drum sander. That is the best way to do it, really. It's quick and easy and very accurate. If you don't have a thickness sander, I mean, hopefully, and I would always suggest, by the way, you want to try and get the two halves of the top almost down to thickness before you glue them together, because it's just a lot easier to work with them, you know, when they're half the size. So get them down to near thickness, and then once they're glued together, scrape off any excess glue. You can. I know acoustic builders will often do this, so classical builders. You can thickness tops with a plane and a scraper, which takes a very long time. You could, in theory, now I would obviously expect most people to have a router. You could use a facing cutter in a router and set up a sled system, so essentially 2 rails on either side of your, like sandwiching your top in the middle, with your router on a rail. It would then sit on there. I'm sure you've seen it before. Sit on the rails on the side, and you can get what's called facing cutters. So they're essentially designed to take big skim cuts off the surface of the material, as opposed to like an end mill or a normal router bit that you'd use. And you could, super glue mask and take your top down to a surface and run across the whole thing with one of these with a router, and that would get it pretty much down to thickness. You'd probably want to do a little bit of sanding on it afterwards to get rid of any router marks, but at that point it's ready for clamping down and gluing on, which is the easier bit. But yes, ideally I would say, if you're thinking about saving up for any machinery for your workshop, a drum sander is a very, very useful tool. It will save you a lot of time and effort. So yes, it's 20 past. I don't actually have any more pre-prepared questions, but we've touched on staining and painting, and I think if that is all the questions we have, we will leave it there. And of course it keeps throwing me, we're doing this on a Wednesday this week because I'm not going to be here tomorrow afternoon and Matt's in the school, so hence the change of plan, but we should next week be back to Thursday, all being well. So yes, thank you very much for tuning in. Anthony's popped in with any sneaky news on upcoming courses may influence my next build. To be perfectly honest, Anthony, I'm not fully in the loop on which one's coming next. I have a feeling we are doing an acoustic setup course next, and there is obviously still the plan to do the Les Paul Lite. But yes, watch this space on that because I am not entirely certain. But yeah, on that note, I will leave you lovely folks alone, and we will see you next week for another stream. As always, if you've got any questions, please either keep them till the stream and pop them in the chat, or shoot an email to shop@crimsonguitars.com, and they will get handed on to us. So yeah, thank you very much for watching. We'll see you next week. Bye.